Texas Hill Country, June 1883. The storm had come down hard just past midnight, but by dawn the sun rose clean and gold over the hills, catching in the slats of the old McBride barn and in the hayloft, where Magnolia McBride pressed her back against the beams, dress torn, veil gone, breath shallow. She had not meant to cry. But the silence up here, the smell of sun-warmed hay, and the ache in her ribs from riding bareback half the night broke something inside her. Her wedding dress clung to her legs, damp with sweat and river water. Beneath it, her boots were caked with mud. She had lost her bonnet hours ago, somewhere in the cedar breaks. She did not care. She was not going back. Not to a man 3 times her age who smelled of whiskey and owned half the county. Not to vows spoken with a shotgun on the porch. And not to a life locked away in some house like something bought and shelved. Her hands shook as she pulled her knees tighter to her chest. "Hey!" The voice came low, careful, not a shout, not unkind. Magnolia flinched anyway, heart slamming into her throat. She peered through the slats. Below, a tall man in a trail-dusted coat stood beside his horse, looking right up toward her. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said. His voice had a slow steadiness to it, like creek water over stone. "Just saw your tracks. Figured someone was up there." She said nothing. He waited a moment, then took off his hat, ran a hand through thick dark hair and said, "Name's Owen Merritt. I work cattle for the Duval spread west of here. This barn ain't mine either, if that makes you feel better." Still she said nothing. "I got a pot of coffee in my saddlebag, if you want some." "You look like you had a hard night." Magnolia's chin trembled. She hated that he saw it. "I'm not going back," she said hoarsely. Owen nodded once. "All right." He crouched near the barn wall, not climbing up, just close enough she could see his eyes through the slats, brown, steady, not prying. "Then maybe you tell me what you're running from." She swallowed. Her voice cracked. "A wedding." Owen blinked, then let out a breath through his nose like he understood more than she'd said. "That what the dress is for?" She nodded. "Was he hurting you?" "No," Magnolia whispered, "but he would have. In time." She looked down at him, eyes red. "He bought my father's debts. Said I was part of the payment." Owen's jaw tightened, but he did not speak right away. Finally, he said, "You got a name?" She hesitated. "Magnolia." Something flickered in his gaze. "That's a strong name." "I do not feel strong," she said. "You rode out alone in the dark, in a wedding dress, and hid in a hayloft. That sounds strong to me." Her breath hitched. Owen stood slowly, not coming closer, just brushing straw off his coat. "There's an old line shack I sleep in when I am riding fence out this way. Got a roof. Firewood. You're welcome to it. No strings. Just a dry place to rest." Magnolia shook her head. "They'll come looking. Then come with me. Just for today. Catch your breath. You can figure out what comes next after." She watched him for a long, silent moment. Then, slowly, she climbed down. Her dress snagged on a nail and tore a little more, but she did not look back. The shack sat tucked in a grove of oak trees at the edge of a bluff. It was small, one room with a stone hearth and a rough bunk, but it was dry and it smelled like cedar smoke and coffee. Magnolia sat near the fire, hands wrapped around a tin mug, watching the flames. Her hair was still damp from the river. Her boots steamed near the hearth. Owen sat across from her, not crowding, just sipping his coffee, eyes on the fire. She finally asked, "Why are you being kind to me?" He looked up. "Because someone should be." Her throat tightened. Later, after she had eaten half a pan of beans and fallen asleep sitting upright, Owen quietly draped his old bedroll over her shoulders before stepping outside. She did not wake until dawn. 2 days passed. Magnolia did not ask what Owen had told the ranch about his absence, and he did not offer. They kept mostly to themselves, but there were moments like when he brought her wildflowers without a word, or when she helped him mend a saddle strap and their fingers brushed when something warm flickered between them. On the 3rd day, she stood beside him on the bluff, watching the valley below. The sky was wide and bright blue. Her dress was now just a torn slip beneath one of Owen's extra shirts, belted at her waist with rope. "They will not stop looking," she said. He nodded. "I know." She turned to him. "So what do I do?" Owen looked at her, really looked. "You never hide again." Her breath caught. "I mean it," he said. You have been running your whole life, haven't you? She nodded, eyes wide. Well, he said, you do not have to anymore. Not if you do not want to. She swallowed. And where would I go? With me, Owen said. If you want. Magnolia's heart beat hard in her chest. Would that be safe? I would make sure of it. His voice went quiet. I promise. She stared at him, and for the first time in her life, someone looked back at her like she was not a debt or a burden. Just a woman. Just Magnolia. She stepped forward, slowly, and laid her hand over his. Owen's fingers closed around hers. Solid. Steady. I want to stop running, she whispered. Then stay, he said. And she did. Owen returned late from checking the west fence line, his sleeves damp with sweat, dust clinging to his collar. The sun hung low, spilling long shadows across the clearing. Magnolia was kneeling near the fire pit, sleeves rolled, coaxing a flame from damp mesquite shavings. A pot of beans simmered nearby, and the scent of onion and salt pork rose into the warming dusk. You get caught in the draw? She asked, not looking up. No, just took the long way back. He tied off his sorrel mare to the post he'd driven 2 days earlier, eyes on the way her hair caught the last of the light. Found a deer trail by the ridge. Might be worth setting snares come morning. She nodded, struck the flint twice more, and the tinder finally caught. Flame licked the edge of the kindling. She settled back on her heels, brushing soot from her palms. You ever hunt? He asked, crouching beside the fire, one arm resting on a bent knee. No, she said. My father didn't like dirt under nails or sweat on brows. Said it wasn't fitting. Owen looked at her, then down at her hands. They were nicked and raw along the knuckles, blackened beneath the nails. You think he was right? No, she said, quiet but sure. I think maybe he was wrong about a lot of things. They ate in silence. The only sounds the crackle of the fire and the distant rasp of cicadas. As twilight deepened, Magnolia stood, crossed to the edge of the clearing, and stared out at the horizon where the hills softened to shadow. Do you ever think about leaving this place? She asked without turning. He stood slowly, brushing crumbs from his palm. Texas. She nodded once. I did once, after my brother died. Thought maybe Kansas or up toward Wyoming territory. But I stayed. Why? He stepped beside her, gaze trained on the horizon. Because it's the land that raised me, and because I owed it to him to keep going. She glanced at him, brow furrowed. How did he die? Owen's jaw shifted. Caught between 2 bulls during branding. He was 18. I'm sorry, she said, voice barely above the wind. He gave a small nod, eyes dry. He was the good one. I was always the one who looked for trouble. You don't seem like trouble, she said, studying him. That's because I've learned how to carry it quiet. They stood there a long time, the sky deepening into indigo. A night bird called from the oak grove. Magnolia wrapped her arms around herself. I don't know what I'm supposed to be anymore, she said. I was someone's daughter, then someone's bride. Now I'm nothing. No, Owen said, turning toward her. You're someone who got free. That's no small thing. She looked up at him, eyes searching. And what do I do with that freedom? He met her gaze, steady and certain. Anything you want. Later, after the fire had burned low and the coals glowed soft as embers in a hearth, Magnolia sat outside the shack on a flat stone, combing her fingers through her hair. Owen handed her a small tin box. What's this? She asked. My ma's. She used to keep her sewing needles in it. Now it's got a few things, buttons, thread, a comb. She opened it slowly, eyes softening at the worn contents. That's kind. You'll need your own things soon. He crouched beside her. We can ride to Fredericksburg tomorrow. You can choose what you like. Cloth boots, maybe some sugar if you've missed it. Her brow creased. Won't people ask questions? They might, but we'll answer them ourselves. And what will we say? That you're with me, he said simply. Magnolia looked down at the tin in her hands, then back at Owen's face. That's simple. It can be. She closed the box gently and held it in her lap. Then I want to go. All right. When she stood, her shoulder brushed his. The touch was light, not planned, but neither moved away. The air between them shifted, not with words, but with something quieter, something that settled like dust on dry earth after rain. A promise not spoken, but understood. They rode at first light, hooves soft against the dry earth where dew clung to the grasses. Owen let Magnolia set the pace, his gelding steady beside her borrowed mare. The air smelled of crushed sage and dust, and a red-tailed hawk circled above as they followed the shallow bend of the creek toward Fredericksburg. She hadn't spoken much since they left the bluff. Her hands were careful on the reins, but he caught her glancing down at her borrowed boots as though unsure they belonged to her. The road curved past limestone outcrops and live oak groves, and the silence between them widened until she finally said, "I don't know how to walk into a store and buy things." He looked over, but she kept her gaze forward. "You just walk in," he said. "Pick what you need. Pay what it's worth." "People stare," she murmured. "They always did, even before the wedding." "Let them," Owen said. "They don't know you." Her jaw tightened. "They think they do." He didn't argue. Instead, he slowed his horse and pointed toward the hill beyond the cottonwood stand. "Store's 2 more miles. It's run by a woman named Ella Granger. German stock, sharp as a knife but fair." Magnolia nodded once, but her fingers had gone pale around the reins. At the edge of town, Owen dismounted first and offered his hand. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his and swung down. Her knees bent slightly when her boots hit the ground, but she straightened without help. "I'll stay close," he said. "I don't want to be seen as your charity." "You're not," he said. "You're with me. That's different." Inside the store, Ella glanced up from behind her ledger. Her gray hair was pinned in a careful knot, and her sleeves were rolled to the elbow. Her gaze flicked to Magnolia, then back to Owen. "Well," she said, "you finally bring someone worth spending your wages on." Owen dipped his head. "She needs a few things." Ella set her pen down. "Name?" "Magnolia," she said, voice level. Ella's eyes narrowed slightly, not with judgment but calculation. "You from around?" "No," the older woman nodded once. "Good. Then you won't be owing anyone here." She pulled a bolt of blue calico from the shelf and laid it across the counter. "This is sturdy. Won't tear if you work in it. I've got needles and thread if you're handy." Magnolia traced a fingertip along the fabric's edge. "It's beautiful." "It's useful," Ella said. "That's better." Owen watched as Magnolia uncurled, just a little under Ella's dry efficiency. She selected a pair of gloves, a tin of soap, and a canvas satchel. No lace. No ribbons. Only what she could carry and use. When Owen paid, Ella wrapped the goods without fuss and handed the bundle to Magnolia. "Don't let men decide who you are," she said quietly. "They'll get it wrong." Outside, Magnolia stepped into the sun and took a long breath. She didn't ask why. "She doesn't need to," Owen said. They rode out west of town, past a windmill creaking in the breeze and a sloping pasture filled with sun-bleached cattle. He led her to the split-rail corral behind the old bunkhouse where he sometimes slept when riding late. It sat near a spring-fed pond, sheltered by pecan trees. The air was cooler here, and the grass grew thick near the water. "I thought we'd rest here," he said. "It's quiet." She slid from her saddle without speaking, walked to the water's edge, and knelt. Her reflection shimmered beside the shadow of a dragonfly. "I can't remember the last time I chose something just because I liked it," she said. Owen unsaddled the horses and let them drink. "You did today." She turned to him. It felt like stealing. It wasn't. She stood, brushing her hands against her skirt. "I was taught that women are either gentle or wild. That there's nothing in between." Then they never met someone who was both. Her eyes searched his face. "And what are you?" "Just a man who's tired of watching good things get broken." She stepped closer, slowly, as though testing the ground between them. Then she reached out and touched his collar, brushing a bit of hay from the fabric. Her fingers lingered. "I'm not ready to be anyone's wife," she said. "I didn't ask you to be," he said. "But someday," she said, "I might want to be more than what I've had to be." He looked at her, sunlight catching in the curve of her cheek. "Then I'll be here." She nodded once, then leaned forward and rested her forehead against his shoulder. Owen didn't move, just let her be there, quiet and unhurried. Behind them, the water lapped gently at the shore. A grasshopper leapt from a rock and vanished into the tall reeds. Somewhere in the trees, a woodpecker tapped a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat waiting to be answered. By the third week, the rhythm of their days had settled into something quiet but sure. Owen spent hours mending fence gaps and checking cattle farther north, while Magnolia worked near the old bunkhouse, washing linens by hand, sorting the contents of the larder, and teaching herself the shape of a life not bound by someone else's will. She found a rhythm in it, churning butter with a borrowed dasher, sketching small figures in the dirt with a stick when the fire burned low, learning to fold her new shirt sleeves back with a neatness her mother never taught her. She even patched Owen's work shirt one afternoon, sewing in silence beneath the sycamore while goats grazed in the distance. One evening, after the sun had slipped beneath the ridge and the frogs had begun their calls near the spring, Owen returned with a fresh sack of cornmeal slung over his shoulder and a worn book tucked beneath his arm. "For you," he said, setting it down beside her on the porch plank. She ran her fingers over the cracked leather cover. "What is it?" "Psalms, mostly, and a few poems. My mother used to read it when the work was done." Magnolia opened it slowly, the pages brittle but clean. "I haven't read anything since I was 16. "Well," Owen said, settling beside her, "you've got time now." She turned the pages, careful not to tear them, then asked, "Why do you keep it all these years?" He rested his forearms on his knees. "Because she read it with a voice that made everything sound like it might turn out all right." Magnolia looked up at him. "Did it?" He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "Not for her. But I'd like it to for you." She pressed the book to her chest. "No one's ever said something like that to me. I don't say things I don't mean." The next morning, Magnolia rose before first light and walked down to the pasture barefoot, dew soaking her hem. She stood at the fence, watching the cattle stir, and listened to the earth waking. A breeze lifted her hair, and she let it. She didn't tuck it back. Not yet. Owen found her there after feeding the mare. He leaned against the post, arms folded, watching the same herd. "You don't sleep much," he said. "I keep expecting someone to come riding over that ridge." He didn't correct her. He didn't tell her she was safe. He just stood there with her until the sun cleared the trees and painted everything gold. Later, in the cool shade of the shack, Magnolia laid out the cloth she'd bought in Fredericksburg across the floor and knelt beside it. She measured with a bit of twine and marked lines with a bit of charcoal she'd found near the hearth. Owen watched from the doorway. "You making something?" She smoothed the fabric. "A dress." His brow lifted. "You know how. I remember watching the housemaid take my mother's in once. I think I can puzzle it out. And if not," she looked up and met his eyes, "then I'll wear it anyway." He laughed, low and surprised. That night, a storm rolled in from the west, slow and distant at first, then closer with each hour, thunder rumbling like a wagon will over stone. Owen checked the roof twice, shifting the oil lamp to catch leaks, but the beams held. Magnolia sat beside the fire, feet tucked beneath her, the book of Psalms resting open on her lap. "I used to think God was a man with folded arms," she said, eyes on the flames, "waiting for women to displease him. I don't think that anymore." Owen sat quietly across from her, warming his hands. "What changed?" he asked. She turned a page. "I think maybe God's tired of seeing women punished for surviving." The logs shifted, sending sparks skyward. She closed the book gently and looked across the fire at him. "I'm not hiding anymore," she said. Owen nodded once. "Good." She stood slowly, then crossed to where he sat and knelt beside him. Her hand touched his, steady and warm. "I want to build something here," she said. "With me?" "Yes." He reached up, brushing a curl from her cheek, and let his hand linger there, callous palm against soft skin. "Then we'll build it together," he said. And when the rain came, they stayed inside the little shack, the fire warm, the roof sound, and the space between them finally quiet, finally whole. The wind shifted in the second week of August, hot and dry out of the west, curling dust along the narrow paths between the oak groves and lifting grit into the trees. It brought with it the scent of distant fire grassland burning somewhere past the ridge, too far to threaten them directly, but close enough to put a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Magnolia stood beside the barn wall, arms folded, watching the sky. The horizon wavered under heat and the sun sat heavy above the hills. Owen emerged from the stall, sleeves rolled, sweat darkening the back of his shirt. "They'll need water moved closer if the wind doesn't turn," he said, voice low but direct. "Pond's running low." "I'll help," Magnolia replied. He gave her a long look. "You sure?" She nodded. "I've been sewing for 2 days. I need to move." They hitched the mule to the water sled and worked in tandem, no wasted motion between them. She guided the reins while he hauled buckets from the spring, pouring them into the trough until it sloshed over. The mule swatted at flies with its tail, and the sun pressed down harder. "Your hands will blister," he said after she emptied her third pail. "I'll manage," she answered, wiping her brow with the back of her arm. He didn't argue. Instead, he passed her a strip of cotton torn from an old shirt. She wrapped it around her palm without asking why. Without thanks. There was no need anymore. Later, they sat in the shade of the lean-to, legs stretched out, canteens nearly empty. Magnolia leaned her head back against the wood, eyes closed. "I heard something strange when I was in town," Owen said. She opened one eye. "What kind of strange?" "There's a man asking questions." Described a girl in a torn wedding dress. Said she vanished near the river road. Magnolia sat up straighter, the air around her going still in a different way. Owen watched her carefully. "He's not with the law. Just some hired mouth from San Marcos. Paid in gold to stir talk." "Did anyone point him this way?" "I don't believe so," he said. "Ella sent him toward Llano. Told him she heard a girl matching that walk headed north." Magnolia exhaled, but her shoulders didn't drop. "I don't want to leave," she said. "You won't have to," Owen replied. "I mean it," she said, turning toward him. "If they come, if there's trouble, they won't," he interrupted, firm now. "But if they do, we face it. Together." She stared at him, then nodded once. That night, he brought out a small wooden box, worn at the corners and lined with soft cloth. Inside it rested a ring, copper and turquoise, simple and clean, the stone set flat in the middle. "My mother gave this to my brother when he turned 16, Owen said. "He never got the chance to pass it on." Magnolia touched the edge of the ring, her fingers still calloused from the day's work. "We don't have to go to a church," he said. "We don't have to say anything we don't mean. But I'd like to call you mine proper." She looked up at him, her voice quiet but steady. "And you'd be mine? Always?" She kissed him, then not hurried, not shy, but deep and certain. When she pulled back, there were tears in her eyes, though she didn't wipe them away. "Yes," she said. They married 2 days later, under the pecan tree at the edge of the spring house. Ella came, bringing a loaf of rye bread and a clean kerchief embroidered with blue thread. A ranch hand from the Duval spread stood as witness, and the words were said slow and clear. Magnolia wore the dress she'd made herself, the seams a little crooked, the hem uneven. Owen wore his cleanest shirt and brushed the dust from his boots. The ring fit perfectly on her hand. They spent that evening by the fire, wrapped in one blanket, watching the stars blink to life in the open sky. No one came over the ridge. No riders. No shadows. Just the sound of crickets and the easy rise and fall of each other's breath. Through the fall, they worked side by side fencing, planting onions in the dry bed near the barn, patching the roof when the first rains came. Magnolia learned to shoot a rifle, practiced until the kick no longer startled her. Owen built a second stall for a colt expected next spring. By winter, they had a cupboard full of preserved apples and a box of letters she wrote to herself, not to send but to remember. The man from San Marcos stopped asking. A letter arrived at Ella's one day stating that the debt had been sold again, that no further interest remained. Owen burned it without comment. In February, as snow dusted the hilltops, Magnolia found herself standing on the porch, both hands resting against her belly. She said nothing at first. Just waited until Owen came up from the barn, his coat dusted white. He saw her face and stopped short. She nodded once and he crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. "You sure?" he asked, voice low. "Certain." He wrapped her in his arms, one hand already drifting down to where new life had begun. She pressed her face against his chest, and for a long time they said nothing at all. Years passed. They added a room to the shack, then another. Built a crib from cedar and hung a horseshoe above the door. The boy was born late in the summer, strong-lunged and red-cheeked, his hair dark as his father's. They named him Caleb after Owen's brother. The land held. The herd grew. Magnolia kept the Book of Psalms on the shelf, along with a worn volume of German poetry Ella passed down before she died. She read to Caleb each night, her voice calm and sure as the wind moved through the trees and the firelight warmed the walls. Owen never called her anything but Maggie after that first winter, and she never corrected him. They grew old together beneath those hills, weathered, rooted, steady as the live oaks. And in every moment that came, through every dry season and every full harvest, they remained what they had chosen to be, not rescued, not owed, not beholden. Just free. Just home. And always, always together.